Beautiful. Well, welcome everyone. I'm very excited for another session of ReThink Austin. Today is our technology session. So I'm very excited for our amazing conversation about protecting your digital footprint. I am Michael Ward Jr., President and CEO of Austin Urban Technology Movement, also known as Autumn. And ReThink Austin is brought to you by Autumn, but also by one of our great partners, our Harlem Labs. So we are very excited for today, and this discussion is going to be very impactful. So I want to jump right in. So Rob, please introduce yourself to the audience. And as you introduce yourself to the audience, please let us know, what does digital footprint actually mean, right? Like, what does that mean for our audiences that are here in attendance? So Rob, I hand it off to you.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Rob Miller. I'm CEO of VIP IT. I have what's called a managed service client provider. We do IT services for small to medium-sized businesses, and protecting your digital footprint, as far as I'm concerned, usually means being vigilant about what type of presence you have online, whether it be on social media, how you communicate with people, just the little breadcrumbs that you have as you traverse the internet. Especially since COVID, people are becoming more and more aware of it because of all these breaches that they're seeing in the news and things like that. So I just find it's very important to remain aware of what type of presence you have online.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'm happy that we have Caitlin tuning in right now as well. So Caitlin, I'm gonna ask the same question that I asked Rob before I hand it off to you, Caitlin. Please introduce yourself to all of our attendees here and answer the question, right? What does the digital footprint, really mean to you based on your work and your experience?
Yep. Thanks so much, guys. I'm Caitlin. I am an associate director at Protiviti in cybersecurity and data protection. And that's a great question. I feel like there's so many digital footprints out there, but there's multiple things, right? There's like a passive digital footprint, which are things that are getting taken on you whenever you go to websites and use your apps. But then there's also the not passive ones where you're literally inputting things to create accounts and link accounts. So there's so much information on you. And this is such a important topic because right now, not just Facebook, but data runs almost every company. That's how a lot of money is made, through advertising and data. And the best and most optimal way of advertising is through manipulating your data and understanding who you are as a person. So protecting that digital footprint of yours is super, super important. And yeah, I'm really excited to kick this panel off with Rob. So Rob, what do you think is kind of like the biggest risk, in your opinion, of the digital footprint?
Right now, I would say email. With the advent of COVID, a lot of people have had a lot of free time to sit in front of their computer and try and breach whether it be a company or an individual, steal people's identities, try and redirect funds, things like that. That's what my company is dealing with a lot these days, especially with small to medium-sized businesses who, prior to COVID, didn't think they had to be concerned too much about internet security. It's becoming more and more important, I find.
Yeah, I completely understand. And now that there's like they're phishing emails, right? Which is not like a phishing, but phishing.
Yeah.
And because they have more data on you, they can understand what types of banks you hold. So they can actually send specialized emails to you. And if you click on it, again, it redirects you. It's obviously a scam. And it's really, really important that you understand how to, I guess, look at the telltale signs of if it's a real email or not. And it's definitely something that you have to think about before. So I agree. I think one of the biggest risks for digital footprints is just how we like everything to be connected. And the constant sharing of your data from different companies and different apps is super, super risky, in my opinion. But there's a pro, right? The pro is that you are able to be more efficient, and you're getting ads that are work for you. You're getting news articles that are probably pertain to you specifically. But the con is that you're literally sharing almost everything that you do in your life, like even to what you click on websites with everyone. So Rob, in your opinion, I mean, because there's so many different ways that they can attack, right? We just talked about emails, but what are some of the most common attack surfaces that you've seen for big threats?
I can give, I guess, two specific examples that have happened to clients. Office 365, for example, that's something that a platform for email that a lot of people are using today. In recent memory, we've had two clients that have been breached that way. What happens usually is people don't turn on what's called multi-factor authentication, which is basically you log in with your password, but then you get either a text message or a phone call, some second form of authentication to ensure that you are you. A lot of companies haven't turned that on yet because it's becoming more and more normal or the status quo for like G Suite to force that, but for a long time it wasn't. So for example, in this situation, somebody was able to either brute force attack and get somebody's password and then basically log into their mailbox and look at all their email. And then people don't realize that when they send email back and forth, over time they may send PII or basically personally identifiable information like bank account, ACH information, social security number, invoices, just normal day-to-day business things. And they were able to get access to somebody's mailbox and basically send a fake form with somebody and redirect ACH funds for open invoices. In this case, it was for a few $100,000.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that banks don't take responsibility for some of this stuff. Like if you send ACH or wire money to a bank or to another bank or to somebody, there's no way for you to claw that back.
Right.
So it's a tough way to learn about it when it actually happens to you.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point because multi-factor is one way when everyone asks how to protect their digital footprint. It's one really, really good way of doing it. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the work environment, especially, again, we're going to kind of go through the Facebook whistleblower and probably in a little bit, but Facebook's connected to so many things. It even is connected to a lot of people's credit cards because you can send gift cards to people on their birthdays. So if you can even multi-factor your Facebook account, which I really strongly suggest. There are a lot of apps and websites now that you can do multi-factor. Banks are required to do multi-factor now. And again, just to remind you guys what that means, it means that there's two ways of making sure that you are you. So for example, you're going to sign in with your username and password, but they're going to email you a link or they'll send you a text message or they'll call you and you'll have to like press a button to confirm that it's you. But there are ways that you can do it where you can make sure that it's you signing in because God forbid someone, hacks into your Facebook account, which happens all the time. They have access to so many other things besides just like talking to your friends, right? So multi-factor is a huge way to protect yourself from getting attacked. Okay, so the next question is why and how is the digital data of minority populations valuable and how can it be abused? So Rob, I'll let you start with that one.
Just like I think this question, I guess, is interesting to me because it's not just important to like minorities or to us as individuals, but everybody, because I think for a long time everybody just hadn't taken it seriously. It's like why should I personally worry about it? They're going after either a big company. It's like I don't have a lot of money, things like that. People don't understand that it's not just about you individually. It's about getting access to who you know, because a lot of people, it's a confidence type thing. It's like, hey, if I get access to you and all your contacts and I'm able to send a question, like for example, one of those common hacks is they send them, they get access to your contacts and they call somebody that you know and say, hey, I'm in trouble. Can you send me money? And the only reason that person's sending money is because they think it's somebody they know. That's one way they attack you. And there's the other way where they just use your information to create a fake identity, set up bank accounts, set up cell phone, just normal everyday stuff, which affects your credit. And these are all a lot of things that people aren't aware of until, like I said, it's too late. It's like it's already happened, and now you have to deal with it.
Yeah, and it's like you don't know what you don't know, and a lot of minority populations come over here and they don't understand, everything, which is fine. I mean, we don't understand everything, so it's hard because you're not going to be like they're not going to constantly track their credit. They're not going to constantly track things that, I mean, I constantly track it because I am in this industry, but a lot of people, again, you don't know what you don't know. So the fact that like your data can be used again to start with credit cards and, potentially wire funds to people that you think that but it's not actually correct. Like they're kind of scams that are honestly sometimes even geared towards minorities, to people that don't understand, because I guess it's not even just minorities. It's a lot of times the elderly population too gets scammed a lot, because again, you don't understand the environment, and they don't have the time to kind of really, I mean, it's not their life, so they don't need to understand what's going on. So it's a very big deal. And I know I've seen a lot of people whose credit has kind of just sunk because they didn't realize that they were attacked. But the good thing to know about that is, if you do get a notification saying, your data was compromised by XYZ, if you're part of that target hack, they're actually required to allow you to do credit monitoring for, I think, depending on the state that you're in, a year to 18 months. So you get free credit monitoring. So if you do get emails, obviously it could be a phishing email, but make sure that you review the emails and understand what data is, was breached or taken, and really pay attention to that, because they are required to let you know and notify you if your data was compromised. And then they are required, depending on what type of data was compromised, to kind of compensate in some way, i.e. giving you free credit monitoring. So it is really important, again, to read your emails and read them carefully just to make sure it's not a phishing attack. But yeah, I totally agree with you. So the next question is, what was the issue with Apple devices when we became infected with spyware? So I don't know, Rob, if you have, any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I understand what the hack was, but how to protect against it, that's a different question, because that's what was called a 0-day vulnerability, which basically means they had 0 days to address it. It just all of a sudden people found out it was happening, and it had been happening for some period of time. That was one of those difficult ones that if you were affected by it, in most hacks, I don't know if people are aware, but most hacks, you actually have to click on a link or go to a website in order for something to get downloaded onto your phone or your computer. In that specific case, you didn't have to touch it. Somebody could have sent you a text message just because they know your cell phone number, and then you're basically breached. So that's actually a pretty scary vulnerability, and it's one of the first ones I was aware of, especially that could have been widespread. So that's another reason right there to just remain vigilant and update your devices, whether it be your cell phone or your computer. Little things like that will help tremendously.
Yeah. And I totally understand that. And there's so many vulnerabilities out there. This brings up kind of another topic, which is the apps that you download. Like, there's so many apps getting developed every day, right? And you don't know who's developing them. You don't know where they're coming from, what type, like if they're China developers, Russia developers, like there's so many apps out there that are literally kind of more scammy, and they're there to like take your data. And so it's not just an Apple thing. Again, it's similar to, it's not just a Facebook thing, right? It's not just an Apple thing. You really need to understand what apps you're actually downloading. And look, I look at like all the reviews and where it's coming from and how many times they've done bug fixes. Obviously Apple does review, like I think they do a review of the apps before they put them live. But again, thousands and thousands of apps come out on the App Store, and things fall through the cracks. There's not a lot of, there can be bad actors anywhere in the world that are building these apps. So really be conscious of the apps that you're downloading, even like the little games that are advertised on random websites. Like, I know obviously Candy Crush is not an example, but it's an example of like a game that you see on a website banner, you click on it, it looks fun, and you download it. So it's being mindful of, like, just because they have a banner on a website doesn't mean they're like a legit game. Like, that anyone and their mom can, create these banners and push out advertising for their app. And it's just really making sure that you're doing the due diligence to make sure that that app is okay, number one, and number two, not getting connected to all these other things on your phone. Because when you download apps, like I'm sure you guys know, it says like, allow app to have access to your photos, allow app to track through other apps, you have to like go through all these processes. And even sometimes for me, I don't click on all those. I don't allow it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I honestly try to not allow things. And again, that's another way to minimize your digital footprint, right? Is to not continually connect everything to each other, to not allow access to everything on your phone to every app, because you don't need that. Even allowing a notification, like push notifications, you don't need to allow push notifications for a game. I mean, maybe you do, but I don't. So just being mindful of that. And this kind of goes into the next question of like, are there risks on video games too? I don't know, Rob, if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think there's risks with everything. It's kind of, the thing is, most people aren't educated or aware of what the risks are, which is understandable, because if you don't work in technology or you're not up on what's going on with privacy or some of the big companies, it can get a little overwhelming. I mean, to add on to what you were saying before, it's like, I know I'm guilty of having a lot of apps on my phone, but every so often you should just log into your phone and see like, am I using all these apps still? I mean, you may have been using it 3 years ago all the time, but today it's like you might not have opened it in 2 years. Or something like, when was the last time this app was updated? If an app hasn't been updated in over a year, chances are either the company is no longer around, or it's just not viable, or it got sold or something. You may want to think about getting rid of that app. Just because it's like the longer it stays on your phone, it represents potentially a vulnerability at some point in the future.
Right. And I will say I would push out updates for your apps like automatically. I used to not have them automatic, but honestly, updates for apps, I would say 99% of the time are very important. And if you're not pushing them out on time, again, they're like vulnerabilities and they're just kind of ticking time bombs. And if you don't, I never constantly checked my app store and I didn't realize I turned it off. But that is one thing I would say to like push out is if there are updates. And then based on the, just going back to that video game question, I think it depends on the video game, right? Obviously there's different video game consoles. There's also things that you can do on like video games that you can do online. Those are probably a lot more vulnerable than like the Wii and PlayStation. And I don't know what video games are. I played the original PlayStation. That's where I'm at with my age. But
yeah.
I think there are more vulnerabilities online. And again, it's those links on the side, the advertising that you click, and you kind of get suckered into doing it. But I see that there's a question from Desiree. So any suggestions for tools or best practices for folks who share login information with others? Rob,
you should never share your login information with others. That's my first answer. I can answer this question 2 ways, I guess. For example, something we do for companies is enterprise password management. You can also do it personally too. There's a lot of password management tools out there because what we find is a lot of people will store all their passwords in a text document or notepad or an Excel spreadsheet, and then it's terrible, honestly. And also they don't password protect those documents. So what we suggest or recommend is use something like LastPass or 1Password. They have a lot of free tools, or at least they have a free tier that allow you to save all your passwords personally, and then you enable two-factor authentication for that. So you don't have to remember all of those passwords to those 200 websites that you go to all the time. But 2, you can also sort of protect yourself from having other people, if somehow you download something onto your computer and if somebody gets access to your computer and they're able to get all your passwords. As most people, either they use the same password in like 50 different places, or they don't update their password over 2 or 3 years. Like a perfect example would be like the Yahoo email attack from a few years ago. Yahoo got breached for I don't know how many millions of email addresses, and a lot of people might not use their email account for Yahoo anymore, but it's still online, it's still out there. Just because you haven't logged into it doesn't mean there's not important data there. Nobody logs in to like delete their mailbox. They should or download it and save it somewhere, but it's like that's something that could just for the rest of your life, somebody could be logging into your Yahoo mailbox and then downloading everything or finding out important information about you in order to create either a fake identity or, as I said before, redirect funds, things like that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, Desiree, I just don't know a reason why we would share passwords. But if you do, again, the password manager is good. And there's been a lot of recent studies on how to like develop passwords and what a password policy should be, how long it should be. And the most recent, I think, that I've read and what we've kind of implemented at my company is at least a minimum of 16 characters. The reason why you used to have to change it a lot is because there was only a minimum of 8, which just makes it a lot easier to guess. But if you have a longer password, you don't need to change it that often because it's extremely hard to guess that. Like obviously a longer password that includes like random characters and numbers. an example of an easy way to do this is come up with like a really random wacky sentence, like a long sentence, and put like some random characters and numbers in there. And it's a lot like harder to hack into, and therefore I don't feel the need to have to change it. And I'll have that password for multiple things because again, it's extremely hard to guess more than 16 digits. Like there's a whole algorithm to guessing passwords, and it takes computers a certain amount of time to guess a certain length. And it obviously it's going to get, we're going to need to keep making passwords longer as we go on in life. But right now it's pretty good for a 16 or more digit password. So I would honestly start thinking about making longer passwords, but that you could use for multiple accounts, which I know I feel like it's very contradictory, but if it's that long, it shouldn't be that easily guessed. So I don't know.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, I know a lot of places have changed, like you said, from the 8 to 16, using like long phrases, things like that, transposing letters with numbers, things like that. Things are easy to remember, and then also trying to add multi-factor wherever you can. To me, it's like, that's what I can't stress enough, because I talk to small and medium businesses all the time, and they're like, IT security is too expensive. I'm like, oh, it's too expensive until you get hacked.
Right.
But it's like I also understand, being a small business owner myself, that you have to balance the security with a budget in mind. And something like multi-factor, I tell everybody, like, you can get a certain level of security, you'll get like 80% of the way. And then that other 20% is when it starts to get expensive. Because then you start talking about documentation. Do I want a dedicated security analyst? And then, like, do I want to audit or do pen tests on my website? Am I it's like, what is my business? Is my business e-commerce, or am I out there just to market to people?
Right.
You have to take all these things into consideration. And I feel like everybody should talk to somebody who specializes in security like yourself and get some kind of an audit. Whether it doesn't have to be an aggressive audit, like I'm going to go out there and pen test myself, but at least review your business practices. Like, what are my line of business applications that I use every day? What's the most important? What can I not afford to get hacked? Because what we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months is companies that are starting to do stuff like vendor due diligence forms. Nobody knew what a vendor due diligence form was 2 years ago, but now everybody's sending around these forms with all these questions about security, and the people are sending it to, most of the time, don't know how to answer them, or they're trying to get cyber security insurance and they're sending out those forms, and they're like, oh, do I have to go out and hire somebody to help me do all these things? And like, it can get, like I said, it can get a little overwhelming, but there are resources out there to help you do that. And it's like, I think things are accelerating a little bit faster than most people are comfortable with.
Yeah, and then it's just like the overall kind of data environment, right? When you start a company, you're not thinking about you're not thinking about, oh, let me protect this data. You're thinking about, is this company even going to work, run, operate? Are we going to make money? Am I going to be able to pay my employees? Like, that's the initial like ground zero discussions. Like, you don't even have time, and you're just trying to, again, make your company run more efficiently and effectively. The amount of times I've worked with startups that are like, well, we didn't even think about that because that's not a priority. Like, that's not as like similar to a 0-day vulnerability. It's not a 0-day priority. And they realize a little like further in the game that like they have all this data now, they have to abide by privacy laws. They have to make sure that they're, everything's up to date. So one thing to think about is kind of doing cybersecurity and privacy by design, which means that like when you are building it from the beginning, have those thoughts and considerations in the back of your head. Maybe bring in a consultant in just to make sure that it's built correctly. But I know that we had a question, which was on the screen earlier, which was, what was the biggest risk that is often overlooked when discussing cybersecurity? And is there a difference for children, adults, and businesses? And I do want to say that risk is kind of like a up in the air thing. I mean, there's so many different types of risk. Cybersecurity is such a hot topic, but there's probably like 20 different domains that you can wrap and bundle into cybersecurity. So Rob, I'll let you answer kind of from your perspective, and then I'll give my kind of quick perspective.
I mean, from a high level, I think it's the same for everybody. It's like you're protecting yourself from the same things. Right. My thing is, if you really want to be secure, share as little as possible. Kind of hand in hand with Caitlin. I'm not really on social media that much. It's just, I don't really have time, but that's where I think most people kind of run afoul of this, because it's like you're sharing pictures and personal information about yourself. You're helping somebody else build a persona or figure out how to imitate you to other people to convince them that they are you. That's the big concern these days, because as we become less connected, we become more connected on the internet, but less connected in person. So it's got pros and cons. It's like the pros are, it's like, hey, you don't have to run around all these different places and see people. But the cons are, it's easier for people to take advantage of your identity. So I think people are, it's kind of like they do first and then think about it later. And I think that's the big concern, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, there's so many things that, again, there's so many different types of risks of cybersecurity, right? As a consultant, I was a cybersecurity consultant for the last 10 years. The biggest things I have seen, obviously with the target breach too, you can see there's a lot of vendor issues. And that's why there's been, like Rob had said, there's been a lot of more vendor assessments, third-party assessments, a lot of new laws coming in around vendors. So making sure that when you do sign contracts with them, there's a lot of stuff in place to protect yourself from that. There's a lot of issues with your own internal people. They don't understand the risks that there are around cybersecurity in general. So it's that awareness, bringing that awareness. And there's a lot of access management issues, giving people access to things that they don't need access to. And so all those three kind of combined is really important. But again, if you don't have the basic network security architecture that's built to protect yourself, then again, there's so many other risks. So it really depends on the type of risk. And there are different risks. I know the question was also kind of two-part for if there are different risks for kids versus adults and businesses. There are different risks, obviously, with children. There are a lot of laws actually around protecting children's data, making sure that the websites that children are going on are asking for their their age to make sure that they're okay to go on certain websites. But again, there is kind of a whole different conversation around protecting your kids' digital footprint versus protecting your own digital footprint. I don't know if we have time to go into that, but I think just you can probably Google it. I know that there's probably a lot of stuff on how to protect your kids' digital footprint as well. We got a question on, do you encourage auto-generated passwords? It depends on, I personally believe it depends on your your password generator. I think the Apple password generator is pretty good. I try not to do it because honestly, I just like making my own passwords, but I don't know, Rob, what do you think?
As long as you set the parameters correctly. It depends on the password generator, as Caitlin said. So it's if it's going to be some simple password generator that is only 10 characters or something like that, no. But if it's something that's going to do 20 characters and you're using a password manager, because the thing with auto-generated passwords is, people use them and they don't have a password generator. A password manager. So then they copy and paste it somewhere. So that's just as insecure as putting an 8-letter password, because chances are somebody's going to breach it at some point.
Yeah. Do you have a preferred password manager? Which one do you use on your phone?
I actually use 3 of them. So the one we use for the company is called LastPass. It's pretty robust. I've used LastPass and 1Password as a company. Both of those are really good. I think those are pretty big in the industry. And then I also personally use Dashlane, just because it's an easier interface, especially on the phone, and it plugs into any web browser and things like that.
Yeah. Speaking of web browser, before we go on to the next question, there's another thing that you can do on your web browser to kind of protect yourself, which is going on incognito mode, and also clearing your cookies on a weekly, monthly basis. So if you go to your settings on your internet browser, there's ways to clear your history, clear your cookies, clear anything else. This also helps when booking flights too, because again, websites save a lot of this information and they use it to understand who you are and what you want. And so fun fact, if you're ever wanting to book a flight and you've been searching for that flight, if you clear your cookies usually and you go back and you try to rebook, it's cheaper because they don't remember that you just looked at it. But yeah, clearing cookies and turning on incognito mode for your internet and your browser is super important too, for them to not track you. But again, this may be slightly more inconvenient for you because it won't remember your passwords for certain websites, and it's not going to automatically log you in. So this kind of brings us to the next question, which is, should people have any reservations about having their browser save their login info? I like the convenience of bypassing inputting my information. So Rob, I'll let you take that.
That's a hard no on that one. You should never save your passwords in a web browser, if at all possible. A lot of the enterprise solutions, if you were in a corporate environment, they actually turn on policies to block you from doing that. So for that very reason, because somebody gets access to your computer somehow or your web browser, because if you think about it, for example, with Google Chrome, you can set up your own personalized account with Google Chrome and you can sync everything across your different devices, which in theory is great because then, hey, it's like, I want to see all the websites I was looking at on my work computer, on my home computer, or I want to access all these passwords. It's great and it's convenient, but it also opens up your attack surface. So people can access any one of these devices and get access to all your information in that web browser. It's like a lot of people are moving to the new web browser. I think it's Brave as one example. I mean, that's super. We're more secure than using like either Firefox or Safari or Chrome. But as Caitlin said, at the minimum, I would recommend doing incognito.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing is like, yes, I know it's convenient. I personally don't do it for every website, but I do save for certain websites like my Gmail account, which I shouldn't, but like, I have such long passwords that sometimes it's easier and I go on Gmail constantly. So it'd be irritating. And I usually keep Gmail up for the whole day and then I'll log out. But there's certain things that I'm like, it is for my convenience and I don't want to be inconvenienced by that. And there's apps that I trust. But if it's just like, again, if it's like some random website that has like, if you're going shopping and you have a website that saved your credit card, I would not save that as a login. And I actually wouldn't ever save, this is another fun fact, I would not save your credit card to any random websites unless it's Amazon because it's easier if you order Amazon all the time. That's my one exception. But I try not to save any of my credit, like when it asks like, would you like to save this credit card on file so it's easier to check out next time? Just don't do it. There's no point.
Just jumping on the credit card thing is I do find it convenient also to save credit cards online, but the one thing I tell people that when they ask me about credit cards is pick one credit card to use online. Don't use all your credit cards online. That way you can log into that credit card once a month to see, hey, is there any strange activity? Because I guarantee you, whatever credit card you use online is going to get hacked or breached at some point. It's just the way it is. But at least you can call the credit card company and get your money back. You can't do that with a debit card. You can't do that. And you can't keep track of all your credit cards because it's just not realistic. It's like people, the way they usually do it with credit cards is they get your credit card number. They put like a small, tiny transaction, like it's 50 cents or $1 just to test it, see if you notice. And then they slowly up it over time to see how much they can get before they hit you really big. So by the time people get to it, it's like usually 2-3 months down the line, you can't get your money back. So be careful.
Yeah, no, and that's like it's a very well-known method that people do because you don't, obviously if it's like a $700 transaction, you're gonna be like, what the heck is this? But if it's like $1.50, $2, like I think I read an article, I think 2 years ago, and it was someone like that took out like hundreds and thousands of dollars just from taking $1 or $2 a day out of like a corporate account. And no one knew because again, it's $2. So yeah, definitely check that out. And I do realize that it sounds like very scary, but like, I mean, it is life, things happen. And the other thing is going off of kind of what Rob said is keeping one credit card. I also have one email address that's like kind of like a junk email address that if I ever have to like create an account or log in for things that I never usually use, it's very easy to create an email address. I just put all my junk email or like the emails for accounts that I randomly had to create on there. So I would definitely suggest doing that. And also Google allows you to create Google Voice. There's a Google Voice that you can get free phone numbers. Like you can constantly change your phone number. I had the same Google Voice number that I like put to things that they require. Again, my phone number. I don't want to give out my real phone number. So things to think about too. So it's not like all tracked to you. Obviously they can go through Google and somehow track it back to you, but I just don't want to give my real phone number. I don't really want to give my like legitimate email address. So I have all of that go to specific areas that I know. So I don't know, Rob, if you use like a Google Voice number, even for like, I mean, because Google Voice it transfers them to your phone. So it's not like you're not getting them, but like even for, doctor's appointments, like pretty much everything goes through my Google Voice number.
Yeah, I definitely have email address dedicated to online things. I find that very useful as well because, like, especially when you're signing up for newsletters or things like that, you don't want coming into your personal email box because it gets a little crazy over time. So I definitely use that. I also use Capital One for example. Now I use its virtual credit card numbers. So you have your real credit card number, and then you install a plugin, and they'll generate a virtual credit card number. That makes it harder to hack you. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of new technology coming online to help people make it easier. The problem is it's just not it's hard to know which things are available, which cards and things like that. Just a lot of information that you have to sift through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I actually didn't know about that Capital One thing, and I have Capital One, so I'll start using that
Yeah.
plugin. It's good thing. Yeah, I mean, even the Google Voice. Even when I make hotel arrangement, like anything, it goes through my Google account, so I don't have to give my phone number just in case they get breached, and then my phone number is not out there for everyone. But the next question is, what apps or programs do you suggest parents look at for tracking what apps, websites, people their children are accessing? And this is I guess this is a common question. I don't have children, so I don't fully know the answer to this, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. There's a website or there's a service you can use to install on a person's machine. They call it a productivity. I can't remember. Productivity is a software called ActiveTrack, basically. So that's something you could use. I don't know if they do it for individuals. It's usually used at companies, and they call it productivity software. So you can track like what sites are people using and things like that to make sure that they're using work-oriented things. If you want to get into like actually monitoring kids, there are sites out there, but I can't come up with any off the top of my head. I'd have to do a little bit of research. That's something I haven't looked at in a while.
Yeah, and I mean, there are ways that you can like turn on like for like big companies like Netflix, obviously TikTok, they're like kids accounts, and it's supposed to be filtered. So I've heard that. I don't know how. I mean, obviously you can look at your web browsing history and look at the websites they looked at too. When they're on the website, I think there should be a plugin to like monitor your kids from going on.
I think the problem here is that they make it a little too difficult for this because every router that you get at home has this ability somewhere in it. You have the ability to either do time block or time box people, say your kids can only get on the internet from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. or whatever. So there's that ability. There's also the ability to do content filtering. You can turn that on most routers. So just say, hey, I don't want my kids to be able to go to anything gambling sites, porn, whatever. Yes, and just pick whole categories. But they don't make it easy. It's not in the same place in every web browser or every router. That's the problem that I run into. Yeah,
I totally agree. And so the next question is kind of around the Facebook. Facebook was down for a period of time this week, and there are rumors that 1.5 billion profiles were stolen. So fun, and being sold. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that, Rob?
I did not read that. I thought the timing was kind of suspicious. I brought this up with other people as well, because the night before on Sunday, they had a whistleblower on 60 Minutes talking about Facebook and how they're not protecting users and they're not managing people's privacy appropriately, and they were calling for regulation. And then the site goes down the next day. The type of issue that was happening then was most likely either DNS or router related. I didn't hear anything about any kind of a breach as far as profiles. It wouldn't shock me that happened, but I don't think that was the issue in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just more of a rumor in my opinion. I don't know though, and I did watch the Facebook whistleblower thing, and I do have a lot of thoughts on that. Obviously, it's Facebook, but I will say, like, the way that we're going in this world, again, data runs everything. It runs money, and I mean, the more data that people have, the more they can manipulate you into buying more, the more their bottom line is. And so it's not just going to be a Facebook issue. I do think there needs to be regulations. There are privacy regulations of protecting your data, but there's not any regulations right now on, how they're manipulating it in certain ways and pushing certain things out. And so I think it's going to be interesting in the future. Again, there are privacy regulations that companies have to abide by to protect your data, but it has nothing to do with how they're manipulating it. And it has a lot to do with our user rights and what we can ask Facebook to do with our data rather than what they need to do. So right now, if you guys don't know, again, you can opt out of a lot of things. So if you unsubscribe to things and you can, ask them to delete your data, most of the time they have to abide. It depends on the type of company, but users do have a decent amount of rights in that sense to ask, like you can figure out how to ask Facebook to delete your data. They have to abide by that too. Obviously they delete your whole account, but things to think about too. Facebook it's a whole beast in itself. I'm not sure about those rumors though. So the next question is, what kind of risks might we not think about when we open ourselves up to tools such as Nest, Alexa in our homes?
I would say extortion is the one that jumps out for me, because the problem with IoT, any kind of device in your home, is people don't change those default passwords.
Just an FYI, IoT is Internet of Things, so it's like whenever everything's connected to each other.
Apologies, I use a lot of.
No, you're good. I do it all the time, and people are like, I had no idea what you're talking about. You just keep speaking in like random terms. Okay, keep going.
So for that specifically, people don't change their default passwords, and then again, there's things called firmware, which is basically the operating system for those devices. People don't update those things, but the problem is the companies don't make it easy sometimes. Bigger companies like Nest, or I can't remember who owns Nest, but bigger companies like that will push out updates more aggressively. But some of those smaller, like if you have a startup that comes out with some cool new device that, you just take it home, connect it to your wireless. Okay, you took it home, you connect it to your wireless. Now what? And did you update the firmware to make sure it's running the latest patch? Is it auto updating? I don't know. These are things that people don't think about. So, and these are things that you potentially open yourself up to when you put those devices on the network.
Yep. And I think back in like 6 or 7 years ago when the Internet of Things, so IoT, was first coming about, there was a speech around specifically like these type of home devices that you're connecting everything to and everything's interconnected. And they're explaining how kind of big of a risk and it is exactly extortion of what they can do. Like say you're in Chicago and it's the dead of winter and they have access to your heat. Like how much would you pay to get your access back? Because they're starting to say they're not going to go after bigger companies. They're going to go after people like all the people that have these IoT types of devices that have vulnerabilities that you haven't updated the patches, et cetera. And it's like, you're going to have to pay, or you're going to basically freeze to death in Chicago in the winter. So it's trying to find those, again, not randomly buying some IoT devices online, but maybe probably the more secure devices like Nest. Even Google Home, I'm still a little nervous about, even though Google's like my life, but I still get really nervous. I'm at my brother's place cat sitting, and he has like everything Google Home, like everything's interconnected, and I'm very nervous about it.
Guilty. I have a Google Home myself, so I was like, Nest cams, they got the video and all that kind of thing. But
Ring.
You got to stick to the bigger companies. Honestly, it's like I love new tech. I like to try out new tech. But if you try out new tech, you have to be willing to take the risk. I would say stay with the bigger companies. Stay with the Google. I mean, granted, they're also you worry about the big companies because like what types of data are they collecting? Because there was that whole issue with I can't remember if it was Google or Alexa. They were collecting the people's voices and recording it to help the system become better, but they didn't disclose this. Nobody was aware. It's like I just automatically by default assume people are collecting information. Period. It's like there's no regulation, and the reason why there's no regulation is the people in politics. There's nobody educated enough in politics to understand the technology, and it's moving so fast that it's hard to regulate. You need people who work in tech, kind of like that Facebook whistleblower. They need to go work or go into government, and then maybe they would be able to come up with some kind of way to regulate this in some way that's realistic, because people still want to be able to use the technology and get the benefit of it, but they don't want to have to worry about the privacy. And honestly, your everyday person doesn't have the time or bandwidth to do it, or they barely even have the time bandwidth to like do day-to-day things. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the questions that were asked to Facebook, like when they were back on trial, like a couple of years ago, they just didn't make any sense because people don't understand how technology works. So there's not really a way of doing that. So the next question is, can you suggest any apps that do monthly checks for discrepancies like the $1 or $2 stealing scheme? I will say, I feel like credit cards have been more on top of random fraud. I'm sure you guys, I don't know if you guys have received anything. My mom's actually getting really irritated because she keeps getting sent new cards because there's potential fraud for a lot of her cards. But I don't know of any apps. I honestly don't have that many credit cards where I'm able to check all of mine. Like I think I have 3 and I check them honestly every month. I like kind of just skim over the bills. But Rob, I don't know if you have any apps that are able to check.
I can't think of apps, but the 2 things that I do that you can, if you have the time or the bandwidth, this again aggregates your data in one place. I use a company called Mint. You can basically log in all your credit cards in Mint, and then all your transactions can get run through it, and you can skim it there. That's one way. Just make sure you turn on multi-factor again. The other thing is you can set up notifications and based on different thresholds. Like for example, I run all my business, not all the business, but we run a lot of business through Amex. Amex, you can set it up so that every transaction gets run on your Amex, you get an email. I can't tell you how many times we've caught fraud just doing that, because it's like I look at every credit card transaction that comes through on the business. Like if I'll see, I think I caught a couple of months ago, somebody tried to buy 2 Apple MacBooks on a credit card. I'm like, I didn't order 2 MacBooks. Where are these things going? And so I called Amex immediately and they took care of it. So that's great. As far as a bank account goes, I have something set up where it's like they have a lot of really aggressive algorithms now where I was like, hey, I use this credit card gas station on La Brea. I live in LA. So I use it here. And then an hour later, somebody tried to use it in like Texas or something. So I'll get a call or a text message. Hey, did you try and use this credit card? I was like, oh, it's not possible. I'm not there. So they'll do things like that. They'll use what's called user behavior or user activity. This is something that Office 365 also uses. This is something we implement for businesses. People don't know that, hey, if you have a company, you can basically block people's, you can basically block people's ability to log into your email account and using something called geofencing. So that, hey, if you're work for a financial services firm and it's like everybody you have works in Texas or California, you can say, hey, if anybody tries to log in outside of California, send me an alert. Basic stuff like that that people aren't aware of yet that you can turn on to sort of protect yourself.
Yep. And I totally agree. And kind of talking about banks, do we think banks are well prepared to kind of protect us both individually and at the business level from emerging attackers and groups? I know you kind of went through that. I personally believe there are ways that they're working. Obviously, there's so many different threats and attacks that happen every day. Like, I don't think people realize that there are literally people like sitting in Russia and in China and everywhere else in the world that are paid to try to attack and hack into things. Like literally that is their job, is to, because the money that goes a lot further there than it does here. And so even if they got a little bit amount of money, it's a big thing. So they've literally like have rooms of people sitting and trying to attack things. So in terms of like banks being prepared, I will say I lived in the UK for a few years. They're a lot more strict, but banks, no offense to anyone that's in the banking industry, it's a very, very slow moving tech. It's not technology. Like they're very behind in that sense. And it's interesting to think that they are, but they are, I do believe, doing their best at this point in time. I think there's a lot more that they can do. Like if you compare like tech startups or even Facebook to banks, like it's a night and day difference.
Oh yeah.
But there are a lot more regulations around banking. So they do have to abide by those regulations, and those regulations do help protect us in the end. But I do anticipate like it getting to be a lot harder to like even to log in the bank accounts in the UK. Like I had to have like 3 or 4 different ways of logging in. It was like a 4-factor, it wasn't multi-factor. It was like, multi, but it was 4 ways I had to do things to get into my actual account online. So it was crazy, but I don't know. Banks aren't, in my opinion, they're a little slow. Again, they're very old and they've been around forever, that it takes them a lot longer to kind of implement and disseminate things throughout their environment. I don't know, Rob, if you have any other thoughts on that.
My thing with banks, it's like I think we're asking the wrong question. It's not whether or not they're well prepared. It's are they incentivized or being motivated to do anything to help you out? Because as I mentioned earlier, it's like there's no accountability. with a bank. It's like, hey, if somebody gets your banking information or redirects funds to another bank, they don't take the hit. So if they
Right.
don't take the hit, they're not incentivized to help you. So, I
Right.
mean, which I guess goes into the next question, about the Bitcoin. We'll talk about it there. But yeah, I don't trust banks like that because it's like most of them, I mean, some bank accounts, different experience than yours. The UK definitely way ahead as far as the American banks go, or ones based in the US. Because I mean, there's some banks here that won't even let you use special characters
Yeah.
for passwords, which is crazy to me in this day and age. It's like, and some of them will even limit you to less than 10 characters for a
Yeah.
password, which is again crazy.
Yeah. And I'll kind of start with the next emerging technologies, Bitcoin and blockchain. This is something close to my heart. My brother-in-law, shout out to him if he's watching, but he is an advisor for blockchain and Bitcoin, and he's been an advisor for a while now. Blockchain actually makes it safer because you're able to see every single transaction. It literally is like, imagine like a timeline, right? And you're hopping from one person to the other. In order to find someone, you literally have to, there's only one way. It's not like a whole web of things. So actually blockchain is a lot less risky than what we're doing right now. And a lot of banks are trying to start veering more towards blockchain. A lot of new banks are starting to go towards that as well. Not necessarily Bitcoin in general. Obviously, there's a lot of different cryptocurrencies now on the market that are fluctuating, and that has nothing to do with it. But the blockchain technology itself as a whole is a genius idea, in my opinion. I don't know, Rob, if you have any other ideas.
I agree. I'm in crypto myself.
Yeah, me too.
So I would say, if anything, that's going to motivate the banks to get their act together. Because if you think about it, blockchain is where new tech is going. No offense to banks, but I mean the minds going in blockchain right now are light years ahead of what's going on in banks. It's like they're democratizing how people deal with money. If you think about it, like for example, if I want to send money from here to Africa, it was like, you can't do that directly. It could take 5 days, 6 days to do something like that. I can do that in 15 minutes with blockchain. It's like, and then there's all the fees. And it's like, if I want to wire money from here to Austin, and it's like, because that's the requirement, it's like $30 and this, that, and the other. And not everybody has a bank account.
Right.
A blockchain, I can just have an app on my phone. Now you can do it with like the Venmo or something like that. And then you can send the money to anyone in the world. And you know it's secure, it's encrypted end to end. So I'm a
just
big
make
fan
sure
of
you have a good password for whatever wallet you're that's
going back to
one
what we
thing
said
that you need
before,
to do.
Two-factor. I mean, a lot of those blockchain and crypto companies, they require three-factor authentication.
Yep.
It's usually an image, so like text or some kind of additional third-party authentication tool like Google Authenticate or something like that. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. That's the whole reason why it was built, honestly, is to be able to pass money around the world and not have to have any of these weird issues with slow banks and paying all these fees. And then also just to store your money in a more secure place. Like, again, it can track back to everything. So, I guess the next question is kind of how, I'm missing it because it's on a banner. How can data from the massive style leaks show up as a threat to our community? We kind of went through this a little bit already. But we can kind of go through it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what we were saying before. It's like the threat to the community is people use that information to steal your identity. And the thing is, everybody, I think they try and scare you a little bit too much with the whole identity theft thing. I mean, honestly, I don't know many people who haven't had their identity stolen at least once at this point. And it's just, there's so many breaches. And unless you're not using one of the big platforms, whether it be Yahoo, Facebook, Target, as Caitlin was mentioning earlier, it's like your information's on the dark web somewhere. I guarantee it. And if you don't have some kind of credit card or fraud set up on your we call their credit reporting agencies, you should go set it up, or at least do something where you go sign up for like freecreditreport.com, where you can pay some kind of a subscription just so you can log in and look at those 3 reports from time to time, especially if you're going to start doing like a big transaction, whether it be buying a house, buying a car, or any kind of large transaction that you're going to need credit for, you should honestly log in 6 months before and start monitoring up to that big transaction to make sure no surprises are going to pop up. Because I think some large transaction a couple months ago, I logged in, somebody said I was living in San Diego and had some massive debt. I'm like, that's not true. I've never been in San Diego. So
It's nice.
things
You should
like that.
join.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. There's so much, again, there's so much data on you already, not to scare everyone, but like, it's not that hard for people to get data. And actually the massive style leaks just bring your awareness more. But like, there are a lot smaller companies that have probably leaked your data that have no idea that they've leaked your data. There's data on, like, again, like you said, in the dark web. And so if anything, I kind of appreciate the massive data issues, because it, again, brings your awareness to, oh no, like, let me make sure I'm checking my credit score, making sure I'm monitoring. And those massive data leaks also allow you to sometimes, if you're part of it, like automatically get that free, credit score we're tracking. But like, honestly, I think even Capital One, I use Capital One too. There's a credit monitoring tool that's automatically in the app. So whenever I'm checking my bank, like, I look at it probably 2 or 3 times a month just to make sure that my company paid me, because, why not? And when you're there, like, I look at, like, if my credit score went down, why it went down, and it will even say why it went down. So things to think about too. It affects everyone, but it's not just the big data leaks. I honestly think we should be more concerned with the data that we're sharing in the smaller companies, because the bigger companies are actually more on top of it with the tech, which is why they can tell that they got hacked. Mm-hmm. The smaller companies are ones that don't have the budget or money to actually even understand what they've leaked. So, and I pretty much guarantee that most of the smaller companies have been or are already, someone's already in their system.
I would have to agree. I mean, just in my experience, it's usually hacks are going on for a lot longer than people are aware that they're going on, especially in the smaller companies, because people either don't build the websites correctly or the apps correctly. So, or it's kind of like what Caitlin was saying previously, is like, you don't know what you don't know. So if you're a small company and you're building your solution for the first time, it's like there's certain things that you're worried about, like, how do I make money? How do I acquire new customers? You're not thinking about, it's not security first. A lot of new companies, that's where they're going. It's like, you got to develop this with security in mind. That's where we need to be. But the thing is, that costs money, and you have to just be able to justify that expense. In my opinion, it's like, it's harder to look back, and I don't know if many have had experiences where you worked for a company that's been around for 20, 30 years, and they're using what they call legacy technology, old websites, old code, this, that, and the other. And then you're having to look back like, oh man, this is not secure. So we need to either rewrite this from scratch, or what they call refactor it. It's a lot more expensive to refactor something than it is to build it right the first time. And a lot of people learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of brings us to our next question, which is, in our careers, are there cybersecurity stories that define the importance of what you do? Rob, I'll let you go first on that one.
I don't know how to answer. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of cybersecurity type situations in my career. I mean, all the way from, I can tell lots of stories. I'd say one that I guess comes to mind is a client that I've had for 10 or 15 years. I got a call late one night, basically, that their email was hacked, and I got called in the office. And what ended up happening is they had an in-house IT guy who, for some reason, was having either a mental break or some kind of issue, and decided to lock the company out of their own network. So what ended up happening is I had to call another IT friend of mine, and we had to spend 36 hours working to basically retake the network back from this person. The reason why this happened is it's like they didn't have strong cybersecurity practice. But again, this is 10 or 15 years ago. So nobody had really had a strong cybersecurity practice. So it was things like, oh, we don't have documentation of all our passwords of all the different systems that we use. And then the only person that has access is this IT person. I work in IT. I love IT people, but we're sometimes it gets a little stressful. We're a paranoid bunch. And then we don't do things up the proper way, I would say. I think you should always have copies of your documentation for whatever IT systems that you have in place at your company. It should be your IT person should have access. You should have access. Also, you should make sure you're an admin in all your systems, along
Yeah.
with the IT person. Things like that.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to your roles and responsibilities, right? The access management. Like I kind of talked about, one of my first times opportunities getting into cyber, and we can kind of talk about how we got here too, like before we kind of go into our breakout rooms. But when I first started, I did mechanical engineering undergrad at USC, and then I did engineering management, industrial systems in grad school at USC as well. And I went into cybersecurity as a technology consultant. One of my interviewees, or the interviewers that was interviewing me, asked me if I wanted to go into cyber. This is like 10 years ago, before cyber was a thing. And I remember just being like, I have no idea what that is, but I'm going to go in it. And so I started my first project. I was doing cybersecurity consulting 10 years ago. And I never realized that there was so much more to cybersecurity. And something that I realized, even like the public doesn't know what cybersecurity is. I think a lot of the public just thinks of like breaches or like attacks, but like there's so many more aspects of cybersecurity that people don't realize. It's not just like coding, right? Like you don't have to be an expert coder. Actually, there's a lot of stuff behind the psychology behind hackers. So we hire a lot of like psychologists. We need like every type of kind of background in cybersecurity, because every person contributes. Like Rob was saying, there's access management, then there's the architecture team, there's network security, there's software security, there's training and awareness, there's the governance roles, there's so many aspects of cyber, probably 20 to 30 different domains that you can kind of all get bundled into cyber. And that's kind of like a story I wanted to share, is because there's so many different risks and so many different things that you can do to protect yourself. And I had no idea what that even entailed until I got into the cybersecurity world. And there's even so I've worked on breaches before. I've worked during a breach when they're like, we know something happened, we need to figure out what it is, let's figure it out, to all the way after a breach where you do a completely reorg and cyber transformation of an entire company. So I did that after the Experian breach. And I went into Experian, and I was doing that for like 3+ years. And it was amazing. It's such an incredible experience to learn all about it. But there's so many cool aspects of cybersecurity. It's not just data. It's not just a digital footprint. It's not just attack. It's not just coding. There's, again, so many aspects. So that's kind of my favorite story about just cyber in general, is understanding how wide that net is, because there's so many different domains, and we need so many different people. If you're interested in getting into it, we can talk about that later. I know that's going to be coming up in the next session, and at the end of the session. But yeah, I mean, Rob, do you want to give a little bit about, how you got into, or how you got to where you are?
Yeah, really quickly, I guess. I sort of fell into my career. It's like I tell people, it's like I tried to run away from IT for a while, but I just always had a natural talent for it. I went to school at USC, similar to Caitlin, for undergrad though, and then I left to go work at a startup. I was in entertainment for a little bit, and then basically it just one day somebody came to me and said, "Hey, you seem pretty good with computer. Would you like to do X?" And I'm sure, it seems interesting. So I was doing both for a while, and then eventually that just became my core focus, and I've been doing it for almost 30 years.
Yeah. And I know this is we're wrapping this part up, and we're really excited to do the breakout rooms. But I don't know if Patty, Michael, if you guys want to give us breakout rooms.
Your volume was off.
There we go. Yeah, we're going to send out the breakout rooms to everybody. So please check your emails. You should have received that. So if you haven't RSVP'd, please go ahead and do that. And we'll make sure to send out the link to the breakout rooms for everybody. And we can go ahead and start the next session there. So Caitlin and Rob, I thank both of y'all so much. This was a fantastic, beautiful conversation. So to all of our audiences, all of our attendees, as a reminder, we're going to go into breakout rooms. So please RSVP if you haven't done so. This event is ReThink Austin. This is our technology session. And this was a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I was taking notes with my wife, and we're going to go back and also listen to the content again and really pull away from some of the great information that was shared. I do want to thank the team, thank all of our panelists, and thank all of our sponsors and partners that allow us to put on a ReThink Austin. So I do want to encourage you all to please donate. This allows us to rethink the trajectory of the city because as we've discussed, there are a lot of challenges. There's several things that are going on in our community that are creating some barriers. And we want to be able to rethink that, right? We want to overcome these and create solutions. So with your support so far, we've been able to engage with our society in several different ways. We have provided scholarships of about $1.2 million to our participants going through our program. We have helped about 16,000 families receive internet access and devices in order to pursue careers so they can get inside the tech industry and pursue cybersecurity, amongst other opportunities. And so we encourage you to get engaged, allow us to continue to impact the community, solve these challenges, and be on the lookout for the next ReThink Austin session. I believe the date is December 18th, if I'm not mistaken, for a community impact session. And you'll hear more information about that as you look to promote that. So looking forward to seeing you on the breakout rooms, and we'll go ahead and end the broadcast. Yeah, have a good one. Talk soon. Bye.